Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I'll be going over a trope that I don't see discussed very often, to the point that some of you may not even know what I'm talking about when I say its name. It's called the butt monkey. But even if you don't know the name for it, I'm willing to bet you're familiar with this trope in some capacity, especially if you watch a lot of sitcoms. See, the butt monkey is the character who is always the butt of the joke, targeted either by the other characters around them or sometimes just by life itself. Because if something terrible happens, it's almost always to the butt monkey.
All your wishes will soon come true. Sweet. Your life will be filled with disappointment.
A few examples of this trope include Gary from Parks and Rec, Thompson from Gravity Falls, and Meg from Family Guy. Just from that description alone, you might have guessed the biggest problem with this trope, which is that it's often incredibly mean-spirited. Using Gary from Parks and Rec as an example, I could easily believe that he would get picked on by characters like April or Tom, who are written to be less empathetic and sometimes actively spiteful, but it's not just them. Everyone picks on Gary, including Leslie, a character who is constantly looking for the best in people and going out of her way to make sure everyone's happy. All of this we're supposed to laugh at, but I cringe every time a Gary joke comes on screen. Even the writers realized they had gone overboard and cut Gary some slack in other departments, giving him a wonderful home life with a loving family. Not to mention
the largest penis I have ever seen.
And while I do find it comforting to know that Gary is happy and has the respect he deserves from the people closest to him, that doesn't change how badly his treatment reflects on the rest of the characters. Gary is shown to be an incredibly nice guy, so they have no reason to treat him this way. All the jokes at his expense seem to boil down to either he's clumsy or he farted. If you wanted to be really charitable, you could argue that we're meant to read everyone's treatment of Gary as playful teasing that ultimately comes from a place of love, but honestly I just don't see it that way. And the so-called humor surrounding him remains a blight on what was an otherwise great show. Because there's nothing wrong with playful teasing between friends. I operate that way with my friends, and I think a lot of other people do too. But part of being friends with someone is knowing them and their boundaries, so you don't go overboard or knowingly target something they're insecure over. Using an example from my own life, I have a friend who's the hardest working person you will ever meet, and everyone knows that about him. So when I make fun of him for being lazy, we can all laugh at that, because we know it's not the truth. Jon Stewart has done something similar on The Daily Show, where he'll play the butt monkey by being made fun of by his correspondents. The reason that's funny isn't so much the disrespect itself, but the warped version of reality they're presenting. But when it comes to Gary, we aren't given much sense of hidden love or admiration behind everyone's mockery of him, save for maybe a few fleeting moments. And the one time we actually get some, when Ben befriends him in Season 7, Ben is then targeted by the other characters and is forced to keep his friendship with Gary a secret to avoid being made fun of.
I'll stand up and say, I like.
Ben, no! What are you doing?
If this episode had led to everyone reflecting on their treatment of Gary and trying to make amends for it, I could at least credit the show for having its characters learn from their mistakes, but I can't even do that. The poor treatment of Gary continues up until the very end, when they misspell his name on his headstone. Given all of that, you might think I'm about to say that the butt monkey is a terrible trope, full stop, and no one should ever use it again. But I don't actually feel that way. As with most tropes, it really just boils down to how it's written, and plenty of writers have found ways to make it feel less egregious. Sometimes they succeed, and sometimes they don't. So we'll take a look at a few more examples. We'll start with Thompson from Gravity Falls. Similar to Gary, he's also mocked frequently by his friend group, which, to be clear, I still don't like, but I'm willing to cut them way more slack than the Parks and Rec crew because these people are literally teenagers, and their behavior isn't too far off from how a lot of typical teenage friend groups operate. That doesn't make it okay, but at least I can rest easy knowing they'll probably grow out of it. At least, I hope they will. But the most notable way that a lot of writers will get away with having a butt monkey is to make the character a bad enough person so that we don't actually feel sympathy for them, and even on some level feel that they deserve misfortune or to be made fun of. This is why a lot of henchmen are butt monkeys for whatever evil overlord they're serving, like Horace and Jasper in 101 Dalmatians. They're constantly mocked and belittled by Cruella de Vil, but we're never given any reason to sympathize or feel bad for them. And while Cruella is punching down, she's not a character we're meant to root for or expect any better from. The woman is literally out to skin puppies, for God's sake. That's about as stereotypically evil as you can get. And Horace and Jasper are helping her without any show of remorse. But a character doesn't have to be straight up evil in order for this tactic to work. The show The Nanny did it with Cece Babcock. Cece's not a horrible person, she does have her redeeming qualities, but she's not a particularly nice one either.
Oh, Mummy, fire that maid. She's too old. Oh, she fished me out of that lake years ago. How long is she gonna milk that?
She's got one hell of an ego and feels entitled to the nicer things in life, including a relationship with Maxwell. And she's willing to lie, cheat, and steal in order to try and win him over. All of this makes Niles' constant jabs at her feel much more justified because he's punching up and standing up to a bully, instead of picking on someone he has power over or who's supposed to be his friend.
I'd rather die young.
And we're all pulling for you.
Honestly, I think this show did a pretty good job taking Cece down a peg when she was being nasty and cutting her some slack towards the end once she started to redeem herself. Brooklyn Nine-Nine tried to do something similar with the characters of Hitchcock and Scully with mixed results. The show does manage to avoid a complete Gary situation by giving these two less desirable qualities, like being lazy, gross, and in Hitchcock's case, just outright creepy. The show is also pretty good about giving them credit where it's due on the occasions that they actually do good work. Where it gets complicated for me is when you separate the two instead of lumping them together.
We're a package deal, everyone knows that.
And you realize that Scully is a complete sweetheart and is really only dragged down by his relationship with Hitchcock, who is a lot meaner. You might have also noticed by now that quite a few Butt Monkey characters are overweight, leading to a lot of the humor around them feeling like nothing more than poorly disguised fat jokes. That is, if they're even disguised.
That's it. I am out of here. She is never going to let this go. An elephant never forgets.
Oh, please, you used that pathetic line on me 3 years ago.
See?
Admittedly, that part of The Nanny has not aged well. I have no idea who looked at Lauren Lane and decided she was overweight, but they must have been on something. But regardless of whether or not a Butt Monkey character is truly overweight or is just perceived as such, it's still a problem because, intentionally or not, it pushes the idea that people who are not conventionally attractive deserve ridicule or disrespect. Even in circumstances where Butt Monkey characters are played by conventionally attractive actors, the shows will still go out of their way to put them in unflattering positions or have the other characters react negatively towards their appearance, further reinforcing the idea, which is one aspect of this trope that really doesn't sit right with me. Making fun of someone for their poor behavior is one thing, but mocking their physical appearance is another. One case I find really interesting is in the show Victorious. They actually had two Butt Monkeys, one in Robbie Shapiro and the other in Trina Vega. Of the two, Trina was meant to be the one we love to hate, while Robbie was supposed to be the one we held more sympathy for. However, at least for me, it wound up being the other way around. That's because Trina was written to be a bad person, so she's at least bad in an entertaining way. And really, her worst crimes come down to being egotistical and socially inept. I'm not prepared to condemn her for either of those, especially since she does show she cares for Tori, and by extension her friends, multiple times throughout the show. And despite the show claiming she has no talent, she is actually shown to be skilled, just not in the areas she thinks she is. She can beat somebody up using karate, and she wrote, produced, and acted an entire play all by herself. It wasn't an especially good play, but it does show she's got a strong work ethic, at least when something's important to her. So the harsh treatment she receives from the other characters starts to feel over the top after a while. Robbie, on the other hand, continuously displays creepy behavior towards women, especially Kat, whom he somehow got cardboard cutouts of without her knowledge, kept them at his house for God knows what, and repeatedly tried to play pirates with her, which, given her reaction, probably involves some form of sexual assault.
Okay, well, do you want to play something else?
Like what?
No! Knowing what we know now about showrunner Dan Schneider, I would put money on that being the case. Robbie's behavior, while not received well by his peers, is usually brushed off as being pathetic, a little creepy, but ultimately harmless. Of course, as any woman who's been stalked and or harassed can tell you, it isn't. So in Robbie's case, the problem isn't that he's a butt monkey, it's that he's not enough of one. This guy really needs to be held accountable for his actions, if not by the law, then at least by the people around him. Most of the examples I've listed so far have been a mixed bag to some degree or another, so now let's talk about my absolute favorite example of the butt monkey trope, and what I often point to as an example of it being done well. And that's Mr. Frond from Bob's Burgers. Like some of the other examples I listed before, the show lowers the amount of sympathy we feel for Frond by making him a weasel. He repeatedly lies to cover up his own mistakes instead of copping to them, he cheats on Aunt Gail, breaks his students' confidence as their guidance counselor, and encourages them to snitch on each other. And while we do get a few instances of him actually helping and caring about people, the good doesn't outweigh the bad and allows the other characters to rightfully dislike him.
Louise, be nice.
Why, it's Mr. Frond.
But what I really love about Frond as a butt monkey character is that everything that goes wrong in his life is ultimately his fault. Every time he's humiliated, caught in a lie, or gets in trouble at work, it's because he was trying to cover up his mistakes or serve his own ego. And you get the sense that if he actually took some time to think and stayed in his lane, most of his problems would be solved. That's what makes him such a great butt monkey character. There are also several subversions or full-blown dissections of this trope that I can point to as being brilliant as well. For example, Po in Kung Fu Panda fits the butt monkey bill, but he's placed front and center as the protagonist, and his cruel treatment at the hands of others only makes us root for him more, and it makes it all the more satisfying when he wins in the end, proving everyone wrong. On Breaking Bad, Jesse Pinkman is also a dramatic rather than comedic butt monkey, getting repeatedly screwed over by life and the people around him. The nice thing about that, though, is that because we're not expected to laugh at him, Jesse's mistreatment is actually given the weight that it deserves, and his life can be seen for the tragedy that it is. So when it comes to this trope, I take it on a case-by-case basis. It always feels like a cop-out to say that I like a trope when it's done well, because in theory I would like almost any trope if it was done well. I think there are a lot of traps writers can fall into when it comes to the butt monkey trope, and at its worst it can be a mean-spirited attempt to get cheap laughs. But when real thought and care is put into it, it can actually lead to both funny and complex characters. So if you're planning on writing a butt monkey, make sure you consider carefully why they're there, why they're being laughed at, and whether or not that may be warranted. Of course, as always, this is just my opinion. Whatever your thoughts on this trope are, put them in the comments down below. Like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to see more in the future. Until next time, stay brilliant everybody, I'll see you in the next one.